A Russian military helicopter was shot down yesterday in Syria, killing all 5 people on board. The tragedy marks the deadliest incident for the Russian military since 2011, when it first intervened in the country. Joining us today in the studio is INSS researcher Vera Michlin-Shafir to discuss the future of Russia's involvement in the Middle East and its effect on Israel. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
So, to begin, can you shed some light on what happened yesterday? Was this really the deadliest event in the history of Russian involvement in Syria?
Well, it was the deadliest event. The facts are correct, but if we put it in the context of how Russia views its involvement in Syria, I think that from what I've seen today in the Russian media, it didn't attract the attention that we would have thought that it would attract if it happened maybe in another country or if it happened here. I think that Russia stays its course in terms of its involvement in Syria, and I think that there is an understanding in the Russian government and in the Russian public that it is a war and that there will be casualties. So in that context, I can't see how this will really change the course of Russian involvement in Syria.
What do you expect Russia's next move to be in Syria?
I think that Russia, the objectives that Russia put forward when it got involved in Syria in September 2015, where I think that they feel that to some extent they're achieving them, and I think that they will stay the course. And what I mean by that is that the Russians see this arena as the heart of the Middle Eastern arena. Syria represents Russia's involvement in the Middle East, and not only in Syria, and the shaping of the new order in the Middle East. So I think that Russians, and this is also why such an event will not change Russia's course, I think that they see themselves as achieving these goals. They're challenging the US in this arena, which is very important for the Russians. They're positioning themselves as a world power. There is a perception in the region that they are driving events on the ground and political events, and they are also creating leverage for themselves on the international arena. So all of these things are happening, and this is the course that Russia is taking in Syria and in the Middle East.
So, Netanyahu just visited Russia in June, and he raised a lot of concern over Iran's involvement in Syria. What is the Israeli role in Syria, and how will Israeli-Russian relations affect that?
Israel chose to maintain neutral in the war in Syria. It had very strong incentives to remain neutral. So, in some ways, it doesn't have a role. And yet it has interests in the new order that will be taking hold in Syria, whether it's in the near or in the more interim or further future, but it has interest in Syria, and most specifically is what will happen in Ramat Golan, in the Golan Heights. So I think that this is an issue that is definitely on the table in the political discussions between Israel and Russia. And we have to remember that Russia, when it entered the war in Syria, and this is again about the political positioning of itself in the Middle East, Russia basically made itself a neighbor of Israel. So de facto, we can't ignore it, and specifically we can't ignore the opportunity to engage a relatively friendly power that is on our northern borders. In terms of Russia's relations with Iran, Israel, I think, will not be able to really influence Russia's relations with Iran. It has a long history, and it's a very entrenched relationship, although not always as good as it seems. But I think that these are concerns that Israel will voice, but I'm not sure what would be achieved.
How do you think the United States is viewing Israel's recent talks with Russia and just Israeli-Russian relations as a whole?
Well, I hope that what I said earlier is, I hope that it is something that the American side understands, that Russia really very forcefully and effectively inserted itself into Middle Eastern politics in a way that it is impossible to ignore Russia here. I don't think we should confuse things. I think that it is clear to everyone in Israel that the US and Israel are strategic allies, and I think it's clear for decision makers in Israel. But I think that it would be unproductive not to have a political dialogue with Russia.
It's funny the way you explain it. It's like kids bickering, you know, if you hang out with him, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. But, well, thank you so much for coming, and it was very enlightening, and hopefully we'll have you back again soon.
Thank you.